Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, this is Debate Sensei NFA LD edition. This is where we talk about anything relevant to Lincoln Douglas debate for the National Forensics Association. I have experts from that association here, Director of Debate for Western Kentucky, Chad Meadows, and Director of Debate from University of Nebraska at Lincoln, Dr. Justin Kirk. Thank you so much both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
All
you.
right. So we're last episode we talked like cross-ex and prep time, and it was really about some basics, right? Like maybe the first half of the season we were talking very topical, right? It's like all about nuclearism and the arguments that are associated with that. But this is a little bit more general, and we're kind of continuing on with that theme by talking about rebuttals. So a little bit more sort of a broad brush that we're painting with on this one. So let's start with that. How about if I direct this? I'm going to direct this one at Justin. Just a breakdown. How do you perceive the difference between rebuttals and constructives?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two ways to think about rebuttals in NFA LD. And I think a lot of it has to do with the judges that you're debating in front of. And I think that part of it is judge skill level or judge kind of experience within the activity. If you're debating in front of a more experienced judge, somebody who coaches at a program or somebody who's been around for a while, I tend to coach my students to treat rebuttals a lot like you would see them in NDTC to debate, right? A spattering of evidence to respond to key kind of claims or contentions in the constructive. So you're mixing in evidenced responses to key arguments on the other side with a lot of like technical line by line debating, and then some quick brief overviews of how the debating went down, right? Like for someone like me or for someone like Chad, like we don't need a 45-second to 1 minute overview of the round necessarily to understand what's happening on the flow or what's happening in the like minutia of the arguments. That's like one version of how to do rebuttals. Then I think in front of judges who are either less informed about the topic, maybe they have fewer rounds or they're just not as familiar with the literature base. I think rebuttals can be very kind of like evidence light and argument heavy. And I think in front of judges with, who are we consider much more from like the lay public side or people who are more speech experienced, we tend to coach to do rebuttals basically without evidence, right? You should be able to debate with the evidence you read in your constructive. You should be able to make good arguments from that and extrapolate like comparisons, etc. So I don't know if Chad kind of thinks of it the same way, but like thinking of rebuttals as like based on what judge you're debating in front of is really how we go about it.
Okay. So we talked a little bit at the very beginning of the season about the rules of NFA LD. And Chad, I know you're pretty familiar with the rules. Are there special rules about rebuttals, or are they just kind of borrow from other associations?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think the rules suggest that no new arguments in rebuttals.
Is that right?
Just kind of like a standard thing. I mean, the way that like the format is set out, there's technically 3 rebuttals, though like the 1AR is like really not a rebuttal in my opinion, like the way that it like kind of like plays out in most debates. So like the 1AR is like the first affirmative speech that responds to the NC, where you'll like be generating mostly like new argumentation, other than sort of like using the 1AC case to like respond to arguments against the case. So we kind of treat the 1AR more like a 2AC, where it's like for the most part you're developing like arguments against the positions the negative has brought up. And then like, for the most part, like you're using the evidence in the 1AC to substantiate the 1AC. One thing I say is like, if you keep having to read like cards to support your own case in the 1AR, you probably should just like start putting those cards in your AF. It's like, yeah. So, I mean, I would really agree that like
that far out. You could prep that far out. You could just like, all right, these are the ones that are going most likely. Probability.
I think so. I mean, like, so a lot of people, I think, like if you look at the way they construct their cases now, it'll make the stock issues crowd go kind of wild. But they probably are only reading like one card that's like the plan works, and like everything else are preempts.
Okay.
To sort of like, are you like, no, like the thing that I think you're going to say isn't true.
Oh, okay.
And so like those are really helpful to have for the rebuttal. But I mean, yeah, I think the rules I think just say like no new arguments or rebuttals.
Yeah,
I mean there is one interesting rule which is very different from other associations where like the affirmative gets more overall rebuttal time or overall speaking time in NFA LD than others. And I bring this up because in that rules getting to know NFA LD episode earlier on in the season, we actually had Kevin Minch comment on it and sort of explain like the whole rules behind the citation and why the original rule about like full citations existed. And so what's the logic behind giving the affirmative more overall time to speak, and specifically rebuttal time?
Well, go ahead, Chad. Yeah.
I'll go quickly. My read is just that people were adopting the LD times from high school. Basically, the biggest complaint about high school LD is that the 1AR is too short. And they're like, let's make it longer. That's my read. But like, there could be a much more complex discussion.
Yeah, I was going to say basically the same thing, that they've copied the speech times, in fact, so much so that when students look up what are the LD times and they're new to the activity, you'll frequently hear someone give a 4-minute 1AR because they're copying over the high school speech times.
Okay.
I don't think there's a necessary logic behind it. I do think it kind of creates, well, I mean, I'm of two minds about it. I think in some rounds the AF has a lot more advantage by having that extra time, but I also think that like in some rounds the negative has more advantage by putting a lot of pressure on a 3-minute speech with 6 minutes of argumentation in the 2NR. And we can talk about a minute of like how to strategically push the 2AR to a point of like breaking, because I think that a lot of AFs have a hard time managing that 3-minute kind of speech in response to double the arguments.
Okay. And how's the community like respond to that? Is there any grumbling about the time? Like, there's almost always discontent within the community about this rule.
I would say no.
Okay.
Mostly because I feel like the 1AR being a little longer makes NFA LD less sort of like theory driven in the 1AR.
Oh, okay.
And high school LD. So like my read is that high school LD is like very sort of like theoretical argument based, especially like in the 1AR, and there's like more acceptance of like reverse voting issues. This is getting so in the weeds, but my read is that is largely because most people have like kind of just accepted that in like national circuit debates the 1AR cannot cover the 1 in C, so they kind of like have to generate like layered up offense that like is sort of like not the substance, versus in NFA LD, like the 2AR is very challenging, but like for the most part, like 1ARs can cover like 1 in C. So there's not like the need so early in the debate to kind of like panic and go like, I've got to go for like this theory argument. The longer 1AR, like what you cover. So like my read is that I like the difference. I think it's weird that the app has more speaking time, but like just judging high school and college LD, I personally just like think that it ends up making our debates more substantive.
Yes.
Okay.
Which I think is a positive thing for the activity.
Okay. Are there any you guys do like data analysis over the splits on like AFNEG wins or anything like that? I was wondering.
It's really hard to predict. I think there's so much judge variance in this activity, like predicting speaker points and predicting like AF side. I mean, you'll go to some tournaments and you'll see out rounds and the neg won't drop a ballot for like 3 straight elimination rounds.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
You're like, oh my God, this topic's so neg biased. And then you'll go to the next tournament and the AFs will all win rounds 1, 2, and 3. And you're like, but no, the topic is AF biased. And it's just like tournament variance, like, is really wild in NFL LD. Judge pools, entry lists, there's no consistent national circuit. It's not like NDTC to where like everyone is going to the same 7 tournaments.
Right.
And so you get kind of a consistent metric to measure everyone else's performance off of. Like I think doing like an ELO system in NFL LD would be really tough because you don't get as many head-to-heads as you do in other formats of like the top 15, 20 debaters. Right. And kind of circling back to like the like strategy of this stuff, because I mean this is supposed to be a podcast about the rebuttals. I think that like one of the ways that the 1AR like can do the things that it needs to do in NFA LD is something that Chad was talking about, which is don't read cards extending your affirmative. right? That is a waste of 30 to 45 seconds you don't need. If you can't get through your AF responding to the NC's best arguments in a minute, minute and a half at most with just analytics, extensions, comparisons, you need to refigure how you're doing your 1AC, because the 1AC needs to be filled with offense that you can deploy. I mean, think about this topic, right? So there's two generic disads. There's deterrence and assurance, right? And so any good 1AC is going to have link turns or offense built into those disads in like why an NFU is good for deterrence or why an NFU is good for our allies, so that you can just explain those warrants in the 1AR instead of reading your deterrence and assurance link turns. You're like, no, that's in this evidence in the 1AC, 1, 2, 3 warrants. That's much faster than reading evidence.
Yeah, I in my courses, I teach the difference between, so like argumentation, refutation, and rejoinder. And so the rejoinder is like, I don't know, I use chess analogies where it's like you do your opening and then they respond to it. And then the end game is more about the rejoinder. So you got to be thinking about your end game all the way from the beginning, right? You got to be setting those things up.
I love chess analogies.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think that there is a substantial overlap with chess theory and debate theory, and a lot of things that carry over from those two. And I love the opening, mid game, end game analogy. I think it works so well in debate. Yeah. The only difference is in chess, you could checkmate somebody before the end game, but that's neither here nor there.
Like we talked about in the last podcast.
TKO in debate.
Yeah.
We're just too polite to say anything as the judge, right?
It's over. It's just done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. You were mentioning, Justin, earlier about that you should be able to respond in the first minute. And so what are you doing with the other 4 minutes?
Okay, so the way I see this, right, like the 1AR is a time problem to solve.
Okay.
Right, because you have X number of off-case positions to cover, and you have to extend your affirmative. So start with how long does it take you to answer a hefty response to the 1AC, right? A minute and a half should be kind of your top end, maybe 2 minutes if there's like a hypersonics turn and a conventional shift turn and a bioweapons turn. Like if people are reading like small disads to your AF on case, it may take you 2 minutes. Then subtract back, right? So that gives you 4 minutes left out of the 6 or 4.5 minutes. Time your responses to predictable arguments. You know people are going to read topicality roll if you're reading an NFU AF, or if you're reading give weapons to Taiwan, you know people are going to read T reduce. So time your T block. If that takes 45 seconds, you've got now 3 minutes and 45 seconds left and 2 or 3 off-case positions to handle. So I think any good 1AR is like thinking about time management the entire time they're prepping that debate. And that's what I mean by like, if you can get through your affirmative extensions in a minute to a minute and a half, you know how much time you have left to deal with the unpredictable parts of the 1AR. Because extending the affirmative, answering T, those are predictable things. Answering the deterrence disad, pretty predictable. The scenario is going to change. The internal links might be different. Same thing with the assurances disad. It might be a South Korea disad. It might be a Japan disad. It might be Saudi Arabia. But the structure of the disad will be the same. So you can predict those things and practice them, and then time out all the predictable parts of the 1AR, and then know what time you have to work with for the rest of the speech.
Okay. And how does
an even simpler way of putting it is just the 1AR is 1 minute shorter than the 1NC. Where are you getting your minute?
Yeah.
Are you spending less time than the negative spin on case? Are you spending less time than negative spin on a disad, on T, etc.? And so like, as an introductory sort of like thought process to strategic 1AR, where is your minute coming from?
Yeah.
And like, if you have never thought about that, you're probably the debater who's losing a lot of AF debates because you're dropping stuff in the 1AR.
Right.
So like, you know, that to me is one of the barriers, honestly, from most debaters going from like, I'm like a novice or JV debater to like, I'm an open debater that can like clear. It's like, do you make massive coverage mistakes in the 1AR because you've never thought about the 1 minute problem?
Right. I mean, I used to have debate partners that would spend the time repeating their arguments twice because they thought that I don't know, sort of reinforce it in the judge's mind. I'm like, oh my god, oh my god.
Yeah, nothing makes me more angry as a coach than someone dropping just like an argument and the one like, you have a timer. Like,
yeah.
Well, and then that brings me to something else. Like dropping arguments in the 1AR stems from another problem that I think is just prolific in NFA LD, which is debaters need to flow the debate.
Flow
the debate, right?
They
like
don't?
so many debaters, and I think this is like a COVID generation thing.
They flow the doc.
They flow the doc. They debate off the document. They will answer disadvantages that were not read in the debate. They will drop arguments that were read that were not in the document. And so keeping a flowed, like on a notepad or a piece of like blank paper of the debate that matches with what was said, because most judges are going to flow on paper. They're not going to just read the speech docs. Most judges actually won't even open the speech docs until the end of the debate and debate an evidence question. And so knowing that, why would you ever debate off something the judge is not looking at or paying attention to?
Okay. That's wild.
This is a get off my lawn moment. When me and Justin were learning to debate, there was no doc. And so one of the first things that you had to get good at was listening to your opponent and like flowing what they said. If you're a debater who's never debated without a doc, you probably have just not, unless you had like, honestly, a really good coach, you probably have never been pushed to not look at your doc and actually learn how to flow. Like a lot of kids who are self-taught, who are like mostly like trying to like do it on their own, like they just debate off the doc because it's like it's right there, and like they have never been taught that they don't have to. But I mean, it's flowing is, I think, one of the biggest issues, not just in NFA LD, but like in policy debate, in any format. Flowing it's down. The kids can't flow.
Yeah, like that. Now that you mentioned it, even in my debate class, where I'm like, all right, this is like I have a whole video on how to flow, and then I have an assignment on how to flow, and they'll do the assignment. But when it comes time to do the debates, they're still not taking notes. You know what I mean? Like,
I was lucky as a young high school debater. My high school coach was really cruel and was like, hey, we're going to take you as like an observer to the St. Mark's High School tournament. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Dallas on a trip. And he's like, your job is to follow Kamal Ghali around and flow him every round to learn how to flow. He was maybe like one of the top 5 fastest debaters who've ever debated. And I was like, lost for 6 rounds. But then I learned to flow. And like one of the things is you've just got to be put in a situation where you have to do it because your brain will figure it out over time.
Yeah.
And so my suggestion is like, if you're a coach who's like having trouble having your kids flow debates, or if you're a debater who's having trouble flow, practice without docs, practice without speech drop,
always practice without docs. Never, never get those docs.
And I'm a visual learner, so
coach, relentlessly make fun of your students for looking at the docs.
I've realized that I'm very visual in the way I think, and so especially in rebuttals, learning to flow was probably the number one thing that helped my rebuttals, because when I see a big old blank spot on the flow, I'm like, oh, there's the drop, you know what I mean? Or like I can drop that if I want to. So visually, that having a flow sheet for specifically for rebuttals, the topic of this episode, I think is critical. We talk a lot about the 1AR though. Let's transition to the 1NR. Like this is your last chance. It's a 6-minute speech. Is there any way, you said, Chad, that they're kind of similar, the 1AR and the 1NR. What differences are there?
So I think the big difference is that the 1NR both has to respond to arguments, but then also resolve arguments in a single speech. And so I think it's one of the most challenging speeches in NFA LD because you are basically having to do 2 different things on every single flow. Generate all of the arguments that you need to sort of like respond to what the 1AR has said, but then also win that position is a voting issue that the judge should like make their ballot choice on. And so I think figuring out the split between those 2 things is kind of one of the more challenging components of like starting to do NFA LD.
My initial instinct, and this is like from an outsider, is like if I had a 6-minute speech and I had to do that, I might be doing like a 4 and 2 split. I mean, I don't know. Is that do you make that type of distinction, or is it different from round to round?
I think you just got to collapse. I mean, I think like you just have to. So like if you're coming from policy and you're used to being like, yeah, there's 2 dis-ads, a counterplan, case, and a K in the block. No, like the amount of content that you can cover in the NR and like actually cover it, like weigh it, answer all of the 1AR arguments, compare evidence, not just read a bunch of cards, like doing all that stuff. Like you can go for a dis-ad and a couple of case arguments. You can go for a counterplan and a dis-ad. You can go for T. That's it. You can go for a critique, right? Like, so the NR has to like make immediate choices that I feel like doesn't happen in most other formats.
Okay. So now what happens to the other positions? Are you just kind of blipping off a little bit of defense to kind of go, this is why you're not voting for that, and you're kind of funneling everything into the single position that you're collapsing down to?
You can do that one, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you're looking for offense as the NR. Like, what are the 1AR offensive arguments? Are there independent voters on T that I need to answer? Are there voting issues on the counterplan that say reject the team, not the argument? Is there a link turn on a dis-ad I'm not going for? Also, if there's a link turn on a dis-ad, you should probably go for it because you got to spend time answering the link turn anyway. So you're going to invest a minute answering offense. You might as well spend that 2 other minutes explaining the dis-ad and going for it. I try to like tell my debaters, if somebody reads a link turn to a dis-ad, like that should have made the choice for you for the NR of like, you have to answer that anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And then like case arguments, I typically you're going for the stuff that is most advantageous for you winning the position. One of the things that really frustrates me is like seeing somebody go for T for a minute and then being like, I proved they're not topical, and then go for everything else in the debate. And it's like, if you're going for T, you have staked the round on the AF cheated.
Yeah.
The AF did something against either the rules or made the debate unfair or took away. Like, you're going for the AF cheated in this debate. You can't then go for, here are my other arguments in a world where the AF didn't cheat. Like, you've kind of like put your hand on the table and said, look, this is what I got, right? I got straight to the 9 and you've got to beat that, right? And if the other person, like, they need to respond to those arguments, right? And I think that going for T with other arguments kind of undermines your argument, and a good T debater is going to know that I've got 6 minutes of arguments here, you know?
Okay. In that last 3-minute speech, I'll be honest with you. I think that would be throwing me for a little bit of a loop. I got good, in NPDA doing one or the other rebuttals. They only have 2 rebuttals in NPDA, and it seemed fairly natural after a while. But if I had to come up and give another 3-minute speech, I feel like I'd be repeating myself a lot. Does that happen a lot? Do people just kind of, or is there a technique that I'm missing?
So I think that like there's a strategy to giving a good 2AR. I think it's really, really hard. I think the second hardest speech next to the NR is probably the 2AR. How do you push through? Well, so one, you cannot give a 2AR if there's not good arguments in the 1AR. So every good 2AR is set up by a 1AR that covers, that has hidden offense, that can generate new arguments, right? The 2AR is a little bit different, and it really bases on what the NR went for. If they go for T, you've got a limited set of options to kind of extend in the 2AR. If they're going for the K, the same thing. You kind of have to pick as the 2AR too, what is your best path to the ballot, given the kind of NR choice? So if the NR chooses to go for a critique, are you better off weighing the affirmative? Is the affirmative like still standing enough at the end of the debate for you to weigh affirmative impacts? In that world, you probably want to go for some framework arguments. Are you losing the affirmative, at which point you want to go for like alternative offense, dis-ads to the alt plus a permutation of some kind? So like a lot of the 2AR choice is like, what's my best path to the ballot? I've only got 3 minutes and I need to like win that way and extend a little bit of the AF on the side. My kind of advice for folks in the 2AR is make the decision on your offense after the 1AR is over. You kind of rank, here's my 3 best ways to the ballot. Watch what the NR does, and then kind of evaluate which of these is still the best option, re-rank them, and then be like, okay, I got to pick the best route. And then maybe if you've got a minute at the end, go for number 2, right? And see if you can't get another path to the ballot there. A lot of debaters take the path of most resistance in the 2AR.
Oh,
they will see like a line of arguments and be like, oh my God, they answered all these arguments. I've got to go there on the flow.
Right.
For all this stuff. The 2AR is about finding the path of least resistance, right? What is the quickest route to the ballot? Because you've got a 1-minute problem that's now a 3-minute problem, right? And so the problem in the 2AR is tripled. So you talked earlier about, well, the AF has all this time. Well, 2 times in the debate, they have to manage a time trade-off that is disadvantageous in a substantial manner to them, right?
Okay. So like what you mentioned beforehand, again, we could like the chess analogy where it's like, don't go for the path of most resistance. The way I kind of put that is that you're playing not to lose. And in the 2AR, you need to be playing to win, right? Yes. It's like, and so if you're going for a bunch of defense, you're not playing to win. You're playing not to lose. You're trying to cover this stuff. And a 3-minute speech is not built to cover. Right, the 3-minute speech is built to like persuade, your last chance, and so you were saying that you rank order 1, 2, and 3, and then you go for 1 and then maybe 2.
So like let's set up a hypothetical. Let's say the NR goes for topicality, right? Typically the 1AR's got a counter interpretation, a we meet, some counter standards, and a reasonability argument. Usually those are like 4 pieces of a good 1AR response. And the negative is really loaded up on my counter interp. My definition's not great. I'm like not doing great on the counter interp. Well, maybe my best path to the ballot is like an easy we meet. That their interp isn't very good either. And I know that if I spend 1.5 to 2 minutes explaining why I'm topical under their interpretation, I don't even need to get to the counter interp debate.
Yeah.
Or in a different situation, maybe my we meet is just like badly written in the 1AR and I screwed that part up. I need to go for like the counter interpretation plus reasonability. My interpretation doesn't break debate. It's a good model for like clash and education. So really rank ordering like what the 1AR did and what the NR responded to those things and saying, here's what's the easiest way for me to like respond to those things and win the debate.
Okay. So how is the 2AR, Chad, you were talking about, it was like preparing, like having like evidence ready to go. Is it just non-existent to read any rebuttal evidence in the 2AR, or?
No, I've actually only ever seen one debate where the 2AR read evidence.
Okay.
And it was in national finals, and they did win. So I don't know.
Really?
But yeah, vast majority of the time, as in like 99.9% of the time, you should never read any evidence in the 2AR.
Because it's just a time suck, right?
You have time. It's also like, I mean, all the arguments that you need to win the debate should already be in the 1AR. Like you can't like the 2AR is for trying to like salvage the 1AR. You don't have time to like re-solidify new stuff that you didn't actually put in there. And you'd be much better off just like figuring out what's the one argument that I like did make in the 1AR that's helpful here, and then just like winning that one argument.
Oh, okay.
So to me, 2AR, I think that the way that you win, the debaters who are good at 2ARs are the ones who understand debate theory the best. And not like theory as in like off-case theory arguments. I mean, like they understand the parts of a disad and how much they have to win on a disad to take out a disad. Because like debaters who are like younger and they get what a disad is, but like they don't understand like, oh, if I win like one internal link turn, the whole disad falls. Right? Like, the ones who can understand the function of every single kind of argument that the 1AR has at its disposal are the ones who can give good 2ARs, because you don't have to win that many arguments on the negatives offense to win the debate. If the negative's going for a counterplan and you like win that the perm solves the net benefit, debate over, right? Like if you are going for a disad and you win a non-unique in a link turn, debate over, right? So I think like a good 2AR starts with, do I understand how to go for a couple of arguments and execute on those and win those? And the last thing is like just knowing what you're talking about, Like people who like actually understand their app, actually understand their blocks, actually can like explain them and be like, okay, the ENR made like 5 arguments, they were all like hogwash, right? Like those debaters are just like so good in the 2AR because it's like they actually get it and they understand what their arguments are saying, and so they can get out of a lot of the negatives arguments like pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'll add one thing here because this reminded me of something one of Chad's favorites, Grant McKeever, said to me the other day, which is a good AF and a good neg knows what the answer to the 3 or 4 major questions the resolution is asking and what side they fall on that question, so that the 2AR is like, yo, I'm on this side of the deterrence dissent, I'm on this side of like mutually assured destruction, this side of like reassurances, and you just know your responses to those, like this side of the debate versus that side of the debate going in. Right. And that makes 2AR choice a lot easier if you like an AF like that don't know which side of the debate they are on the deterrence debate are going to lose a lot of AF debates.
Okay. I think that's a great place to end it right there. Right. Like knowing the questions of the topic before the debate starts is really going to inform your rebuttals. That's something that really rings true for me. So awesome. We will be back to talk more about NFA LD stuff at the next episode. Thank you, Chad and Justin, for giving me insight on NFA LD. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks a bunch, Jared.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.